Well, good afternoon, True Hope family. Still takes practice not to say good morning, but it's not morning anymore. Welcome here, welcome online. It's great to be together. We're starting a new journey. I would love to stay in parables. Those are easy to practice, easy to get ready for, short little sections. But all good things must come to an end, they say. So we're actually starting in the book of Exodus, which is a fabulous journey. Now, some of us have started reading through the Bible in a year, and we've just finished Exodus. So it's like, no, we back to the book of Exodus. But it is so critical. You remember 2018. Those of you who were here, we were traveling through Genesis together. That took us a minute, but it was good, right? And then we ended, and Genesis ended with Joseph giving instructions. He'd been the one who was sold to Egypt, and his father had already died. His brothers had shown up. They were deathly afraid that he was going to go after them. After Dad died, he didn't, but he said, okay, I'm about to die, and I promise you that God will keep his promises. He will take you out of this place into the promised land he promised you, the promise he made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And when you do, take my bones, because I want to be buried there. And then he died. And that's where it ends. So now, the end. No. And then Exodus. The book Exodus in Hebrew actually comes from, and these are the names of. That's the Hebrew name for the book of Exodus. And these are the names of. Because it starts with and. Genesis, and then we go into Exodus. Except there's a teeny tiny little challenge between the books. 400 years have passed. 400 years with some of the songs we sing, right? Maybe you're in the dark. It's time to come out of that grave and all that stuff. It is darkness, like 400 years. Where have you been, Lord, right? 400 years. And then we get into Exodus. But if you get nothing else from today, I want you to hear this. You trust God's promises and plans. That's the title for today. Trust God's promises and plans, because they will never fail. Trust God's promises and plans. They will never fail. If that's not where you're at, you're not in that trust place, then maybe receive God's promises and plans, for they will never fail. Or believe God's promises and plans, for they will never fail. Or hold on to them, right? If you're in the middle of a hurricane in your life, hold on to God's promises and plans. They will never fail. You can take that to the bank. No one and nothing can stop God's promises and plans. Nothing can stop what God's going to do. And those who try will be run over by the freight train. It isn't going to happen. And so that's where we're at. They have been waiting, but Joseph told him, God will come and he will take you. You know how it is when God gives you a promise. The clock starts, right? We think 24 hours is really long, and then a week is super long, and then a month it's like, God, didn't you say, right? And time goes on. 400 years is really long. So the first part of Exodus 1, he goes over, and these are the names of the children of Israel, and then he lists them. And it says in verse 6, and Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was actually the same wording as used in Genesis 1:22 when God has made the birds and the fish and says they multiplied and they filled the sea and they multiplied on the land and filled the air. They spread. Now, God, why do you send us to Egypt? Why, Egypt represents kind of away from God and darkness and a bad place. God, why do you send us to Egypt? Well, God's brilliant. You know why he sent them to Egypt? To cocoon them in a group of people that wanted nothing to do with them. How do you grow from 70 persons in a small family of 12 brothers to a 600,000 men plus women and children? Well, not by letting them be in the land of Canaan where they'd intermarry and there would be no chosen people, but to stick them in with the Egyptians who can't stand the Hebrews, think they're, lowlifes because they're sheep herders and they're strangers, because the Egyptians were a proud race and they really did think that they were superior. And so all of a sudden, God has given them a space where nobody's going to intermarry and they're free to grow. And that's what happened. Now, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, right? For a while, of course, all was well. Joseph had done great things. Nobody was going to touch the Hebrews. But now a new king comes, and he didn't know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of Israel are more come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happened in the event of war that they also join our enemies, these were the Hittites to the north, and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. It's about 60 years after Joseph has died. And there was a revolution, and a new king came out of that revolution, and northern Egypt and southern Egypt combined, and it was just a new group of people, and they have a new leader, and this leader is looking at it very practically. One, I don't want a war with there's 600,000 men. I don't need them joining my neighbors to come against me. Two, really can't afford to have these people leave because they are slaves. I've got some stuff for them to do. And so, therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, which are treasure cities in Pithom and Ramses, which is in Goshen. Now, Goshen is where they lived, and they had flocks and herds. They had lots of stuff. They were wealthy. So what happened between there and now? Well, they think that they started charging them a lot of rent, so all their money goes away, and then started afflicting them, and then eventually enslaved them. And now they're building supply cities. Now, in fact, everything besides temples in Egypt was built out of brick. And so the government buildings and all the big buildings, not the pyramids, they existed already, but all that other stuff. And on some of the buildings it says this: no free citizen was used in this servile employment. They had made them serfs, slaves. Don't worry, Egyptians, we didn't use any citizens for this work. I mean, that's what it says. No free citizen was used to build this big building. We only use slaves. Don't worry, slaves only. So apparently they were proud of that, because otherwise you don't put it on the building. And so they couldn't afford to have this whole group of workers leave. So they suppressed them. But, verse 12, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied. Doesn't that sound like the Lord? And they grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. The Egyptians were really afraid of them. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. They made them even work harder. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. So they were making brick. They were working hard under taskmasters. And all their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. They made them work really, really hard. Isaiah 54:17 says, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. So, it doesn't matter what the Egyptians do, because we can trust God to accomplish his promises and his plans no matter what. He cannot fail. Then the king of Egypt decided that this was still getting nowhere, because they're still they're still multiplying, right? So he goes to the midwives. There weren't just two midwives, but he's probably the two representative midwives, and tells them, every boy baby that's born, I want you to kill them. Leave the girls, you can leave them alive, but the boys you need to kill. And so the midwives feared God, though, and they did not do what the king of Egypt said. So the king of Egypt called them and saying, excuse me, what's going on? Because there's still boy babies happening. So what's going on? And they said, well, our Hebrew women aren't like your Egyptian women. They're vigorous and they give birth before we get there. Now they say it's probably not a straight up lie, that it probably was a difference between the hardworking Hebrews and the more docile Egyptians, but they might have just forgot to say that it helped every once in a while. The king was out to destroy Israel, destroy the line. Why is it and when we start Exodus? Because Eve was promised that the Savior would come from her, right? And then we have the chosen people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and this is all in the line. And so if you kill all the boy babies, what happens? Yeah, there's going to be no Jesus. This is a problem, but God wouldn't allow that. These women were brave. They went against a murderous king, stood up for what God's law was rather than listening to man's law. We can never let government become God. God is God, right? As Christians, we need to obey the law of the land unless that law conflicts with God. But the government, we can't start worshiping government. It's a big deal, and they didn't. And the midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are, I read that. Therefore God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. So they got families of their own, the midwives, because they were usually childless. So Pharaoh commanded his people, saying, okay, that wasn't working, so he came up with a new plan. Every son who is born shall be cast into the river in the Nile, and every daughter shall live. This is his grand scheme. Let's kill all the boys and throw them in the river. I mean, the man's evil, right? The man's evil. So I want you to listen through this for Jesus. So we have Moses is a type of Jesus. Have you ever heard that wording? It actually means that Moses is kind of a picture ahead of time of what Jesus is going to be like. So you read the story of Moses and you can start seeing the story of Jesus in there, because Jesus also comes from the line of Eve, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. In the time of the New Testament, they were still waiting for the promise to Eve to happen. The time between the Old Testament and the New Testament is how many years? Same amount of years, 400 years. Between Genesis and Exodus, 400 years. Between Old Testament and New Testament. Coincidence? No. God does that kind of stuff. God had been silent for 400 years in both places. People were under oppression in both places. The chosen people were under the Egyptian oppression in Egypt, but during Jesus' time, the Romans were there, right? They were looking for a deliverer. Both had a murderous king in place. We read on. And a man, this is now chapter 2, and a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi. Amram is the dad, and Jochebed is the woman, parents of who we know as Moses. So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, and in that day, if it was a beautiful child, it was seen as a special favor from God, or it meant something, right? Like, there's a plan for you. She hid him 3 months. We have very calm puppies here today, but we know, right? They get a little older, they get a little bit more rambunctious. 3 months is probably all you can keep a little kiddo silent. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, and put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sisters stood far off to know what would be done to him. So papyrus leaves built a little ark. Same word used for Noah's ark. It's another type of a deliverer, right? Everyone else died, but those who were in the ark were saved. So Moses was put in an ark of papyrus. All the other babies who ended up in the Nile died, but he was saved. She put Nile mud on it and sealed it with a mineral tar. And then there was a lid on it. And she put it in the reeds. It wasn't floating in the river in the middle of the Nile, because the Nile is wide. She put it in the reeds where it would be on the side And then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens, the regular servant girls, walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid, different word, so this is like her chief attendant, female, to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Just imagine all the stuff God had to put in place, right? We had to build the papyrus. Jochebed had to be willing to put her kid in the river. She didn't know what was going to happen. But she obeyed God, no doubt, right? Because she hid him. They were people of faith. They're from the house of Levi. They were the priests. And, or were going to be. They didn't know that yet. And then the current had to be right. And there might have been a religious festival. They think that bathing ahead of time was part of a religious festival that maybe this princess, she's the princess of Egypt, did. And they considered the water of the Nile sacred near the temples. There were several temples, and the water near it was sacred. Now, it was also infested with crocodiles, the Nile, apparently, so they did have a fence around it to make sure that Miss Princess did not get eaten. But so she's bathing, and there somehow the basket ends up, and she somehow hears it, sends a maid to go get it, and she knows it's a Hebrew child. Her father, not so fond of Hebrew boy babies, is he? They do end up in the Nile, but in a different way. But for some reason, God also worked on her heart, and she had compassion on this Hebrew child. I mean, so many pieces have to work out just so for this story to work. And his sister was watching, Miriam. She was about 10 or 12. She's watching what's going to happen to her baby brother. And then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the maiden went and called the child's mother, like her mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. Wait, she gets her boy back for a while. And she gets to take care of her own son. How awesome is God? He was, she still would have to give him up, but not at 3 months old. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. Moses means drawn from the water. Moses is an adopted child. In our community, we know that sometimes adoption comes with really some tough emotional trauma, right? Abandonment, rejection. Now you get a name that reminds you every day that was where you came from. This is a tough story. Pharaoh's daughter knew he was a Hebrew. He knew he was a Hebrew also, because he had been brought up by his father and mother, right? But now he's an adopted son, and he's called Pharaoh's daughter's son. So a big deal. There's a lot going on there. Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. 40 years old he is at that point. He grew up 40 years old. He'd been trained, we learn in Acts 7, in all the learning and all the wisdom of Egypt. So he had been exposed to grammar, some of us who don't love school, maybe not your favorite subject, literature, writing, geography, science, math, no doubt, philosophy, all the learning of Egypt. He was also heir to the throne. He was going to be the next Pharaoh, they say. And he, as a younger man, had been head of the armies that led the Egyptian armies to victory over the Midianites. So Moses, like, it's not the picture I normally have of Moses. I mean, I think Moses gets stuck in the basket in the Nile, just like Jesus gets stuck in the manger, right? I mean, we know the story, and he gets stuck in the basket or stuck in the manger. He doesn't grow up. Or when he does grow up, now it's old man Moses. But there's like no Moses in between for most of us, right? But this Moses was a learned, gifted, royal person, dressed in the Egyptian way, and they said he was mighty in words and deeds. I want us to remember that, because next chapter we're gonna find out that he doesn't think so, but that's what it says. He was mighty in words and deeds. So he went and looked at his brethren. So who is he identifying with? He's still identifying with the Hebrews, even though he's a 40-year-old adopted man who lives and grew up in the palace as Pharaoh's son, but he considers the chosen people his people. And he looked at their burden not like, oh, look at that. Not like that. And he also didn't get to walk there. He was accompanied by guards. He was probably in some kind of chariot or something. But he saw with emotion what they were suffering. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that. Now tell me, people, when do you look this way and that? What you're about to do. Crossing the road, very good. I think in this case, not so much the crossing the road. Up to no good. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Both hands, blood on both hands. We just sang about that, right? And when he went out the second day, two Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? I mean, Moses somehow has transitioned into these are my people and I'm going to help them. And he wanted to make things right. He saw himself as like not only he wanted justice and taking care of his people, but he also saw himself as the deliverer, we're told in Hebrews 11, the book of Hebrews. And so Moses is going out because maybe 40 means something in Egypt, but he is saying, I am ready. I'm here. Hey, you, I'm here. I'm ready to deliver you. Aren't you excited? Who are you? You look all wrong. You sound weird. And no. But that's kind of how it goes. We have a call on our life, right? We're tapped on the shoulder. We want to do something big for God. And we are saying, here we are. I'm ready. Yes, I'm ready. You called me. I'm ready. But God says, great, I've got your attention, but you're not yet. You're not yet ready. So he is going to be their deliverer. And the one Hebrew says, then he said, who made you prince and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? They're not ready. They're not ready. So Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, do you think Pharaoh might have been irritated that his daughter adopted a Hebrew boy when he was trying to kill them all? I mean, at that age. When Pharaoh heard of the matter, he sought to kill Moses. He had no legitimate ability to do so. But now that Moses killed a government official, he put himself under Egyptian law, and he could be now killed, in fact. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and from the presence of Pharaoh. He ran away, smart move, I'd say, and dwelled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian, who was also the prince of Midian, had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them. He's still in deliverer mode, and watered their flock. When the shepherdesses came home to Reuel, that's one of his names, the other name is Jethro, Why the man has two names, I do not know. Their father, he said, how is it that you've come so soon today? Like, what happened? Wow, it must have gone great today. And they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock. Notice how they see him? An Egyptian. How does he see himself? Hebrew, right? So he's in this space where he doesn't have a place, and he's struggling with his identity. Who he was and who he's becoming are not the same. Anybody in this group relate to that at all, right? So Jethro, Reuel, says to his daughters, and where is he? Because in Middle Eastern hospitality, you don't leave somebody sitting at the well. Why is that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. All right, so Midian. What was the group of people that Moses led the armies to conquer? The Midianites. Who is he with now? The Midianites. How interesting, right? So the Midian is Cush, is Ethiopia. So it said Ethiopians. You want to rewrite the commentaries for me? Okay. Anyway, that's where it's located, but they were Ethiopians for some reason. Do you know who sold Joseph into slavery to Egypt? And who did they sell him to? Same people group, the Midianites. How interesting, right? So Joseph is sold to the Midianites to take him to Egypt. Right? They live in Egypt, and now God chases him out, and he ends up in Midian to try to get the people back out of Egypt. So, I mean, God knows all this. I just find the parallels in there so fascinating. So, catching back up with Jesus, right? Born under murderous kings. Pharaoh tried to murder babies. Herod tried to murder boys 2 years old and younger, right? To get rid of the deliverer. I mean, Satan wanted to get rid of the Messiah. Satan wanted to get rid of the deliverer for the people. Both were protected by God from birth. Both had to leave their throne to come to the people. Jesus had to leave his throne in heaven to come to earth. Moses had to leave the throne of the Pharaoh to come to his people. They both were miraculously preserved in childhood, one through the basket in the river, and the other through fleeing to Egypt. Egypt is also in Jesus' story, right? It's all tied. Both were mighty in words and deeds, and both were rejected by people at their first coming. What did people say to Moses? Who made you judge and ruler over us? What did they say to Jesus? You are no Messiah that we can recognize. They were both rejected as prince and judge. So that's where we're at. But then Moses was content to live with a man, Jethro, in Midian, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses, and she bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, I've been a stranger in a foreign land. Can you imagine Moses? He must have felt like all hope was lost. He apparently wasn't a deliverer, and he must have misunderstood his calling. I promise you, most people who are called by God, we think, okay, I'm called, boom, now it's going to be straight line up and to the right. God's going to take me to where I'm supposed to go. And when God calls you, goes, okay, I actually got your attention now. And then your life goes like this, boom, all over the place. And you're like, I must have missed it. Maybe it was pizza and not God. I don't know. I don't know what happened, but this doesn't feel right. And just about when you've given up, because it makes all no sense and you're nowhere, God's like, now I'm sending you. But we're not at the now I'm sending you yet. So Moses is content. He's just accepted his lot in life. He left royalty. He tried to do what he thought he was meant for, to save his people. he ends up being a murderer, and he runs away, and now he is living in Midian. Mary's there, has a son there. He's just accepted that this is life. It didn't work out as I'd planned. I must have missed the exit somehow. And all sorts of regrets can grow in this place, but that is not God's way. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. That was that king. We have a new king now. And then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. 40 years prior, Moses wasn't ready, even though he thought he was, because he was a prince, but he was not yet a shepherd. He couldn't have carried those people through the desert. He had never lived in the desert. He didn't know that we were going to be 40 years in the desert. So can you imagine, come off the throne, used to a chariot, my fancy clothes, and I'm going to deliver you all. Are you ready for 40 years of desert dwelling at that point? No, we had a little preparation to do. He needs to become a shepherd. He needed to know how to take care of some really unruly, difficult people. But the people weren't ready either, remember? They said, "Who made you judge and ruler over us?" What deliverer? We've got food here, we've got, yeah, it's rough, but it's better than who knows where. And so they weren't ready. Part of that is they weren't crying out. Part of our story with Harrison is that God gave me Psalm 91 and said, as a promise, that Harrison would make it. And he said, and that's the part in the psalm where it starts is, when he calls on me, I will deliver him. I will rescue him, and I will show him my salvation. With long life will I satisfy him. And this darn child of mine would not cry out to God. No matter how much sitting God did on him, it didn't matter. We were not crying out. We were not crying out. And these people had not been crying out. Did God forget about them? No. Does it feel when it's dark and quiet that God has forgotten about you? Yes, it can. And Harrison had struggled with God, and he had kind of said, yeah, okay, I know you exist, but you're not for me. And so on the way to Harborview, we had stopped in Mercer Island. From Mercer Island to Seattle, he hadn't cried out, and I knew what the promise was, so I've been waiting to hear this, like any kind of reaching up. Harrison doesn't remember this at all. He hits the dashboard really, really hard. I was worried the dashboard would break, actually. That's how hard he hit it. And he goes, "God, help me." And I'm like, oh, here we go. Like, he didn't feel that way, but I'm like, oh my goodness, here we go. He reached out. And I think that's what they were doing. They cried out. And their cry came out up to God because of the bondage. They cried out, "Help." It's a great prayer. Jesus, help me. So God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant. Did God actually forget? No. Did God not hear them or see them before? No, but if you aren't, God isn't going to force it. If there's any forcing going on in your life, it's the enemy. It's Satan. He will barge in and break open doors and, kick things down. But God is not that God. He is waiting. The prodigal son story we told not so long ago, right? What's God doing? He's waiting down the road, waiting for you to turn, waiting for you to say, "Help." And he comes running, but they weren't asking, and so he will not force it. But the moment we turn is the moment God hears. The moment meaning like intentionally paying attention, the moment we turn, he acknowledges that he has a covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and God looked upon the children of Israel and he acknowledged them. He said, yes, these are my people. He doesn't treat us well because we deserve it or because we're so lovely, as much as we'd like to pretend we are lovely. He didn't rescue the Israelites for that reason either, but because of a covenant he has promised. And remember, you can trust God's promises and plans because he will never fail. So back to Jesus. Jesus and Moses both will rule at their second coming as prince and judge. Every knee will bow. God's plans will be accomplished and his promises kept. He told Joseph, he told Jacob, I will take my people out. He's keeping his promises. It just takes time. And so God's plan is still working in your life. Maybe you're in a dark season. Maybe there's stuff going on you don't like. Maybe you're struggling with some difficulties. Maybe you have people in your life that are difficult. Maybe your finances are not good. Maybe you're facing decisions you don't want to make. But God's plan is still working, and he works in all things, even the worst things, for good, despite evildoers. Nobody or nothing can stop God. Nothing. So God's attention and love to his people was because of his covenant. God's attention and love toward us is because Jesus. We said yes to Jesus, then God is for you. Doesn't matter what's going on around you. He's always working on behalf of you. But here's some things we can learn from Moses. Taking matters in your own hand doesn't work. It accomplished the death of the Egyptian, but it didn't solve anything. And he was a prince, but not a shepherd, I already said. God's way is not by the sword or wrath or self. God doesn't use those weapons. I mean, he may sometimes, but you'll know. But that's not the norm. God's way is the staff of a shepherd, obedience and humility. Because God doesn't need Moses to be the deliverer. He doesn't need us to be the rescue rangers, even though some of us are wired to want to be those. God is our rescuer. God is our Messiah. Jesus is our Messiah. Jesus is our deliverer. He gets the glory. And that can only happen when we follow and live in obedience and humility and use the staff to lead, not ourself in wrath. So take this as you go. Remember this, that God is for us. If you know Jesus, God is for you. And if you don't know Jesus, maybe you want to get on the good side of this story and not on they're all going to drown people, right? That's coming up. They're all going to drown on that side of this story. And if you're listening to this and you're saying, oh, I don't know if I'm all in. I don't know if I've called out. Well, call out today. Call out to Jesus and say, I'm a sinner. I can't do it on my own. I can't deliver myself or other people. I need forgiveness, and I want you to come in my life and be my Lord so that I too can be part of this crazy good promise that God's plans and promises will never fail. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you that you are the Messiah. You are the deliverer. You are the ultimate rescuer. That Moses is just a picture for us to see how you did it, but that you, Jesus, left your throne in heaven and came to earth, lived our life perfectly, and then died so that you could pay for everything we've ever done. We all have blood on our hands. But you paid for it, Jesus. And all you're asking for us to do is to cry out and say, Jesus, I need you. Jesus, I'm a sinner. Please forgive me. Come into my heart and life. Be my Savior forever so I can be one of your brothers or sisters, your child, going to the future promised land in heaven. Lord, for all of us who've said yes, help us to live like those going to the promised land, not like those stuck in Egypt. Help us to leave Egypt behind and live freely and boldly by following you and walking toward whatever it is you have for us, trusting you even when it's pitch dark, even when it hurts like heck, even when everything seems wrong, because your plans and your promises never fail. And we thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. One more song.